It's your first night working as a security guard at Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria, and it sucks. From the dark, dingy security office, you scan the monitors, tracking the ghastly animatronics as they move throughout the pizzeria. You start to get a sense for how they're moving through the restaurant when suddenly... On night 2, Foxy starts to emerge for real, and while it's obvious that you don't want him leaving this room, none of us were prepared for what actually happens when Foxy attacks. Considering some of the recent entries in the Five Nights at Freddy's series, it can be easy to forget that these games are full of terrifying moments.
Where did the other children go?
We take for granted the hours of game theory and Markiplier that we've watched, and we don't give enough credit to some of the excellent scares that the series has provided throughout. Terrifying glitches that Scott himself refused to acknowledge. Spine-chilling twists that hint at a far deeper mystery than we originally thought. Heck, to this day, the most ambitious FNAF game ever is hidden behind a fake decoy game. With so many terrifying moments over the years, I'd like to celebrate what I believe are the 5 scariest moments in Five Nights at Freddy's. Watching Foxy sprint down the hall for the first time is one of the scariest, most startling, panic-inducing moments in the FNAF series. Until now, every animatronic has moved slowly and deliberately, only breaking into a frenzy at the moment they kill you. Foxy, however, ignores these rules and runs straight into your office. The game lulls you into a false sense of security and leads you to believe that your enemies aren't actively and aggressively coming for you. On night 1, it's conceivable that the robots really are just sort of wandering around haphazardly. Only once Foxy attacks does it become clear that these animatronics are hunting you, and it's a terrifying moment.
I really don't like it. No, it's gone! No, close it! Oh my god, close it! Close everything! Oh my god, where'd it go? What happened? Ah! Oh god, you're like... You get in!
What's really scary though is that there's a 62% chance that you're not subscribed to my channel. Number 4, the Fredbear Switch. Five Nights at Freddy's 4 is one of my favorite FNAF games, and I believe it's among the scariest. There are countless terrifying moments, but on night 5, the game pulls an incredible switch, replacing Bonnie, Chica, Foxy, and Freddy with Fredbear, a singular enemy that aggressively pursues us throughout the night. This is a fun and surprising twist, but you're gonna realize that things have changed pretty quickly. You'll either notice the fact that the sounds are different from prior nights, or you won't, and you'll die in the first few seconds. Or, in Markiplier's case, you will notice, but die immediately to Fredbear regardless.
Okay, what is that? What was that? That was a new noise! Little weird, okay, what the hell's happening? Hi! What the? What the?
However, it's the next night, night 6, where the real payoff happens. After spending the entire night fending off the usual suspects, when 4 AM rolls around, all of the animatronics disappear and are replaced with Fredbear. Perceptive players will notice this, I mean Markiplier did, but even then, it's just such an incredible, scary moment. FNAF games tend to become repetitive after only an hour or two, and by the time the final nights in FNAF 2 or 3 came around, I was already pretty over the whole being scared thing. There just aren't any real surprises in the late game. FNAF 4 gives us that late game surprise, and it's really quite scary and exciting. Even better, it's fair. Every player has gone through night 5 at this point, and thus should be capable of recognizing what's happened based on Fredbear's sound cues. But it's just such a well-executed scare, most people still end up panicking and dying because of it.
Was that Golden Freddy? That might have been Golden Freddy step-stepping. Oh my god, did they switch it up? Oh my god, they switched it up, didn't they? Oh my god! They did! Oh, they did! Oh, they did!
Number 3, Sister Location, Night 5. As we ride the elevator on the final night of Sister Location, Hand Unit mentions to us that there are 2 technicians still on the premises, and that we should encourage them to go home if we see them.
Please be aware that there are still 2 technicians on site today. Try to avoid interfering with their work if possible. Also, feel free to ask them why they are still there and encourage them to go home.
We reach the central room, and just like every other night, Hand Unit instructs us to check that Ballora and Funtime Foxy are on their respective stages. However, when we go to hit the lights, we see the hanged bodies of the missing technicians, yet Hand Unit remarks that everything seems fine.
Great. It looks like everything is as it should be in Funtime Auditorium.
The first time I played this night, the whole sequence went over my head, and I thought the implication was that these people had taken their own lives for some unexplained reason. It wasn't until subsequent playthroughs that I realized the truth of this terrifying scene. Circus Baby needed Funtime Foxy and Bellora's parts to form Ennard, but she also knew that our first task every night was to verify that those two are on the stage, and even hit them with a controlled shock if they aren't. Thus, Baby killed the technicians, or had them killed, and strung them up on the stages so that the AI sensors would believe that Foxy and Bellora were present. When this finally clicks, you realize just how premeditated Baby's entire plan was. As we walk through Funtime Auditorium, we find that it's eerily silent. Foxy isn't there. Baby manipulates us into performing maintenance on her, and upon retrieving her personality chip thing, we're tasked with one final trip through Funtime Auditorium to reach the scooping room. Unlike our earlier trip though, this time, we're not alone. If we fail to follow Baby's instructions, we get jump scared, but by Ennard, not Bellora. Another clue foreshadowing Baby's deception. Finally, if we explicitly disobey Circus Baby's instructions, we reach the security room and activate the secret ending. The moment I heard that access granted beep, the hairs on the back of my neck stood up as I realized I'd discovered a secret. However, what makes Sister Location's Night 5 so scary is what happens at the very end of the game. At first, Baby seems confused that you failed to follow her instructions.
Sometimes I don't understand why people do the things that they do.
However, as she realizes that we know more than we're letting on, she begins to bargain with us.
If they find us like this, we won't be able to try again.
As the night goes on, Circus Baby becomes more desperate, appealing to our sympathies. It's revealed in Sister Location's ending that we're playing as Michael Afton, the purple guy William Afton's son, and the game makes it pretty clear that Circus Baby is possessed by Michael's sister, Elizabeth Afton, who was killed and consumed by Baby in a tragic accident. By the time 4 a.m. rolls around, Ennard has become incredibly aggressive and Baby is equally desperate. With only a few hours left until dawn, we get the following line.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with her again?
Then, Baby starts calling out to Michael in his dead sister Elizabeth's voice.
Hello?
At first, she just seems to replay clips that we've already heard, including what were presumably Elizabeth Afton's final words.
Where did the other children go?
While Michael clearly knew more than he was letting on about the facility, Circus Baby knew more as well.
Isn't this why you came here? To be with me again?
Mistakenly believing that Michael is their father, William Afton, she begins to appeal to his sympathies, expressing that she isn't upset over what his creation did to her.
I know it was an accident.
She tries to convince him that it's still her in there, that it's still his daughter, Elizabeth.
Everything is okay. I'm still here.
When these appeals to Michael's emotions fail, the dialogue takes a final, sinister twist. Elizabeth repeats the exact same lines that Circus Baby did at the start of the night, revealing that the entire thing was a ruse.
We need you so that we can leave. We need you so that we can hide.
There is a living consciousness within Baby, but whatever it is, it's not Elizabeth Afton.
I will find a way out.
Sister Location is a flawed game, but Night 5 is a horror masterpiece. More so than any other FNAF game, it really feels like a payoff for the prior nights. Earlier FNAF games relied on the same gameplay every night, and it made it difficult to have big, grand conclusions like this. They sometimes grow stale and tiresome by the time you've reached the final nights. Sister Location's Night 5 rewards observant players with one of the scariest, most well-crafted sequences in the entire series, and it set the tone for what the FNAF story would eventually become. It's a controversial game today, but I don't think Sister Location gets enough credit for the things it did do right. In spite of all its flaws, I really think it has some of the scariest moments in the entire series. A few weeks before the end of 2017, Scott graced us with an unexpected holiday surprise. A new Five Nights at Freddy's game had popped up on Steam, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator. It was an obvious nod to the prior FNAF entry's retro arcade minigames, or maybe FNAF World, but it was free, so we downloaded it and fired it up. The first minute or so is just this really awful arcade minigame, but we knew surely there must be more to this, right? Scott wouldn't just release this, but even then, I assumed that it was still ultimately just gonna be a spin-off game. Suddenly, we find ourselves face to face with a photorealistic circus baby, one of the most intense scenarios that the series had ever seen, and number 2 on this list, the pizzeria simulator Fakeout. Unfortunately, because of the way that Scott relied on earned media from YouTubers like Markiplier and Jacksepticeye to promote the FNAF games, a lot of people missed out on just how awesome a scare this was. If you watched Markiplier's video ahead of time, you'd sort of realize that this was obviously FNAF 6 and a big deal before you ever got a chance to be surprised. However, for those of us who stumbled upon the game on Steam and downloaded it without having any idea what we were getting into, it was incredible and quite scary. Don't get me wrong, Scott had been known for big surprises like this, especially early on in the series. However, at this point, Five Nights at Freddy's had become a huge franchise, and nobody was expecting the grand conclusion of the series to just drop out of nowhere like this. When I first fired Pizzeria Simulator up, I really believed that it was going to be some little spin-off game, so you can imagine how scary it was when suddenly this cheerful arcade glitches out into the Scrap Baby interview. To this day, the Steam page reveals nothing. All of the screenshots and videos are from the first minute and a half of the game, and the description simply reads, "Presenting a fun Five Nights at Freddy's adventure with a lighter touch for the holidays, Freddy Fazbear's Pizzeria Simulator puts you in charge of developing your own restaurant, design pizzas, feed kids, and get high scores." It's clever because it is an accurate description, just not in the sense that players think. It's a pretty quick scare, and it only works once, if at all, but if you legitimately experience the Pizzeria Simulator Fakeout as intended without any idea that you were actually playing FNAF 6, then you know how spine-chillingly awesome that moment was. Today, these games are so iconic, and we've gone over the lore, the Easter eggs, and the secrets so many times watching game theory episodes. It can be easy to forget just how effective and surprising some of these scares were the first time we encountered them. However, nothing in the FNAF series exemplifies that more than the #1 scariest moment in Five Nights at Freddy's. It's 2014, you're playing FNAF 1, and you're starting to get the hang of it. At the time, nobody really understood the mechanics that well, but you've developed a strategy and it seems to be working. Heck, maybe you've even beaten the game before and know exactly what to expect. You're clicking through the cameras, keeping an eye on the animatronics, when you notice that something looks off in one of the rooms. Has that poster of Freddy's head always been there?
You! Oh god! What the f? What the f? Okay?
Most people underestimate just how rare Golden Freddy's appearances are. He had a 1 in 100,000 chance of spawning, and even then you'd need to look at the correct camera. Most players will never encounter Golden Freddy in normal gameplay. It's really uncommon. So imagine being one of the first players who did. Here's this new terrifying, mysterious game, and we finally think that we understand its rules when bam, it hits you with Golden Freddy. He doesn't operate like any of the other animatronics. He just spawns in your office and sits there creepily, circumventing your doors and everything else. It's the only situation where an animatronic is visible in your office without it being an immediate game over. The dark, lifeless eyes, the crumpled, endoskeletonless body, it's really unsettling. His jump scare is equally creepy and glitchy, and weirdest of all, it doesn't lead to the usual game over screen. Being killed by Golden Freddy results in the Five Nights at Freddy's process terminating. The game crashes to desktop. Upon first encountering this, players were confused and horrified at this rare and bizarre glitch that crashed their game, and naturally people reached out to then up-and-coming developer Scott Cawthon. I met Freddy and I can't play the game for a while as I'm too scared. So I'm on night 3, just chillin', and when I look at my cameras, I hear a little girl laughing, and then I take off my camera to be greeted by Freddy. At first, most players assumed that this was a hoax, you know, someone trolling them, but then other players started to report sightings of Golden Freddy as well. In a fortunate turn of events, Markiplier triggered him during his own playthrough, which provided irrefutable evidence that Golden Freddy was real. Eventually, Scott Cawthon himself responded. I don't know of any yellow bear in the game. Maybe some sort of glitch? This was one of the most brilliant things Scott Cawthon did, and I think it's one of the reasons people found FNAF so scary and why it became so popular. There was real mystery and surprise to it. When I was growing up, there were real video game mysteries that we'd share on the playground. The Missing No glitch in Pokemon Gen 1. The mysterious ice key from Banjo-Kazooie that you just couldn't get. As kids, we'd share rumors and discoveries that we'd made within games, and it made exploring more fun and exciting. With the rise of the internet internet and decompiling games, we lost some of that. Suddenly, the expectation was that you could just learn anything about any game from a simple Google search, and games became a little bit less fun. Five Nights at Freddy's reinvigorated that classic fear of the unknown, and it introduced the idea to a generation of gamers who grew up with the internet and never really experienced the golden age of gaming mysteries. It dropped us into this apparently simple game, and only after working together and collaborating was the community able to start piecing things together and solving the mystery. People discovered the newspaper clippings that could appear on the walls, revealing the game's hidden premise, and that was creepy, but it didn't compare to Golden Freddy. Even if you'd played hours and hours of FNAF and learned all the rules and became immune to all the jump scares, the first time Golden Freddy appears in your office and crashes your game is terrifying. It circumvents all of the mechanics the game gives you to protect yourself, and it reminds you that you're never safe in the halls of Freddy Fazbear's Pizza. Bonnie, Freddy, Foxy, Chica, they made the pizzeria feel haunted, but Golden Freddy made the game itself feel haunted. Like there was something evil inside these files that wanted to get out. Scott playing along and acting like he had no idea what Golden Freddy was or how it had gotten into the game only added to this tension and fear. And to this day, I think it's one of the scariest moments in like all of video gaming. There are so many terrifying moments in the FNAF series, and everyone will find different things memorable. For me, Golden Freddy was the scariest moment, but some of you probably never encountered him at all. Thus, your list might look totally different. You might have encountered things on your FNAF playthroughs that I didn't, so let me know in the comments below what scary moments you'd put on your own list. I'll pick out my favorites and do a follow-up video going over them. As always, thanks so much for watching.